Just up the river from Greenwich, there is a site steeped in London's maritime history.
The first master shipwright's house was built here in Deptford in the 16th century. It holds many stories from its history, and one of its greatest is about to be relaunched.
Almost 350 years ago, Convoy's Wharf in Deptford was the site of the launch of King Charles II's ship, the Lenox. Here, a small group of locals with a keen interest in naval history have worked with developers and politicians to let Convoy's Wharf live again as a shipyard, and in the process rebuild HMS Lenox from scratch.
We want to build a ship which attracts apprentices and volunteers and so on, enables people to understand how wooden ships were built in 1600s. The vision of the Lenox Project is really to get people involved who live locally, mostly young people. We want to try and give young people other opportunities that they don't have at the moment.
What we expect to happen once we get on site is that this in itself will become an experience, so that people will be able to visit while the building is going on.
This area here would have been a canal link through to a vast mast pond at that end.
We're standing at what was the entrance to the canal that originally connected the river to the large mast pond. The proposal is to widen the entrance to the canal and create a new double dock. By doing that, we will recreate the same conditions that the Lenox was built in originally in 1678. So the ship's boats will be built, the sail making will commence, there will be ironworks, giving a very real impression of what it'd be like to actually be in a dockyard building a 17th century ship.
Where we are now is the Master Shipwright's house, and it's we're on the first floor of what would have been the shipwright's offices, and these would have looked out over the Great Double Dock, and the Great Double Dock extended from the waterfront right the way through to almost the end of the site adjacent here, and it would have been capable of taking two ships, quite a large structure. But the Master Shipwright would have been able to work in his offices here and look out through the windows at the guys working on the ships outside. And it would have been a short hop down the stairs to go and speak to anybody or change things or look at plans and all the stuff that's involved in shipbuilding, basically. It has an incredible history. It was the earliest royal dockyard. It received its charter in 1513 from Henry VIII. Before that, it's got a history that goes back, they've found recently in archaeological digs, to the Roman times and maybe even earlier. Over 400 ships, naval ships, were built in Deptford. The Lenox Project is a project to build a replica of a 17th century ship that was built by or at the behest of Charles II and was managed almost exclusively by Samuel Pepys and the master shipwright of the time, a man called John Shish. A ship of that time was possibly the most complex thing humanity had ever built. And shipwrights were equivalent to rocket scientists almost. Every facet of the industry was percolated out into Deptford. I suppose one way to describe Deptford in 17th century terms that relate to the present day is that it's a bit like, it was a bit like Cape Kennedy.
I'm John Shish, Master Shipwright of His Majesty's Yard here at Deptford. And I'm here to tell you a story about how I built the Lenox here in 1678. They built the Lenox here on this yard at Deptford. The design of the ship was actually made in this building. Now the Shishes here at Deptford, although they built the best, most successful ships, Pepys reckoned they were drunks. They couldn't really read and write, and they didn't use a draft to build their ships by. They used their eye, things like that. Which Charles II, who read this, must have been astonished because he knew the truth. And what surprised me is going deeply into the research about the Shishes. In a way, that is partly true. They didn't rely on a drawing to build their ships. In February 1677, Samuel Pepys persuaded the Parliament to vote £600,000 to build a whole new fleet of 30 ships for the King.
Now, one of the significant characters in this is Samuel Pepys, but what was he really like?
He was a very charismatic character, that comes clear in his diary, but that was when he was a younger man. By the time the Lenox was built, he was a little bit more wearied by time. Parliament had only voted for enough money to build ships of 900 tons, but the King absolved them from any blame, saying that any increase in cost we would pay for out of his own pocket. It was to be 150 feet on the gun deck. That's 50 great paces. She was designed primarily to fight in major battles. She carried massive cannons. She carried 32-pounder guns on her main gun deck, which is the same size as Nelson's Victory had. To do this ship, I need 2,000 great oak trees. King Charles II, being a man of flesh rather than mythical beast, decideth he wants some of his mistresses as the supporters to his arms. On one side, he wants the Duchess of Portsmouth, and on the other side, the Duchess of Richmond. In 1690, she fought in the major battle called the Battle of Beachy Head, which was a defensive battle. The French had a bigger fleet and they were out early, and they really won that battle. The only other battle she fought in was in 1692, the Battle of Barfleur-le-Haut, when the English fleet more or less destroyed the French fleet. It was the biggest victory for the Navy ever had after Trafalgar.
On Open House Day, the Master Shipwright's house was briefly open to the public, bringing its history alive.
The story gives us an insight into what life was like in the 17th century, but were they really like us? And has anything changed?
A tankard of good ale wouldn't do us any harm.
The Lenox crew was 440 men. Now, you only need sort of 40 or 50 of those men to actually sail the ship. All the others were really to fire the guns. So, as we know, the Lenox only fought in 2 battles in sort of 8 years of war. So they spent an awful lot of time not doing very much. Life on board, apart from the pay, wasn't too bad, but because they were really generously supplied with pork and beef and peas and things like that. And also a generous allowance of 8 pints of beer a day for every man. So yes, which you'd have a job to drink that. It wasn't full strength beer, but even so, to drink 8 pints of anything a day is quite a task.
Women played a prominent role in business in the 17th century and were quite well respected. And I was really intrigued to read about Susanna Beckford, the fiery ironmonger.
She made all the ironwork, all the casement stays, hinges, brackets and all that sort of thing that went into a ship. A lot of women at this time, when they inherited a business like that, they would either sell it to make themselves rich. Very often they married someone else in that trade for them to run it for them, another man. Susanna Beckford took another course. She decided she was going to run the entire business herself. And she certainly did that. And she's a very forthright businesswoman. She's obviously quite a spiky character you didn't want to mess with. She couldn't even read and write, and yet she'd run a successful business for all those years. So I found that very touching, actually, that an ordinary woman who wasn't educated at all could run a business like that in the 17th century for the king and work on very successful ships.
Back to the sea, returning stones, silver and bone, guided me. Storm clouds forming on the horizon, smoke craft warning.
The Lenox Project started with a small group of friends meeting in Deptford.
We met here at the Master Shipwrights. I can't even remember what the social occasion was, but it was some sort of event that was going on, and we were all sort of sitting around on the waterfront watching the river go by and bemoaning the fact that it would all be tall luxury towers in the not too distant future, and that really, you know, we still had to find some way of affecting this.
Rise up, come on, rise up, be strong, and this freedom is so hard won.
What is there now is a fence and a wall that separates this, the Master Shipwright's house, from the rest of the dockyard site. And the rest of the dockyard site is 42 acres, and it hides a lot of very interesting archaeology. It's that most of the archaeology is below ground rather than above ground in terms of historic structures.
The significance for me is the fact that it will celebrate the vast heritage of Deptford. When I first moved to Deptford, I wasn't at all aware of the fact that there used to be a dockyard here, and I soon discovered that nobody else knew that either. Once I worked out and I heard about what had gone on in Deptford, I was quite astounded. It's always been thought of as quite a deprived, dirty, sort of grubby place. The idea that so many significant things happened in the dockyard, so many amazing ships were built there, and that it was so central to Deptford life, that's what excited me, that there was something that we could really celebrate and that people here weren't aware of. People think that they live somewhere that's got nothing special about it. That's what the importance of it is to me.
You know, I'm the boat builder. We could build this. I mean, and I'm convinced we can. You know, I've never built a ship that size in my life. Very few people have. Certainly not from that period. And wooden vessels are a law unto themselves when you come to building them. You've really got to know what you're doing. But every piece of information we need is available. And the other thing that interests me is that this could become a project where we draw on skills from right across Europe. There's the guys that have already built the Hermione. The Hermione has already gone to sea.
I think the thing that keeps us motivated is just the community spirit, because we all live locally, we see each other quite often, and we all have a real passion and sort of, you know, a drive to get this going. Occasionally, you know, you have things that bring you down, then maybe you take a week or so off and come back to it fighting.
The earliest we'll probably sail the ship will be about 2030. It will be a working museum. It will be the first truly working museum in London, where visitors will be able to come and see the ship under construction and all the various crafts that actually take place.
This is, you know, one of the jewels in the crown, frankly. I think the great thing about having the Lenox on site will be that local people will see something much more about the heritage of this area, about how Deptford linked with its shipbuilding to all the grand palaces. And so we may not complete for 10 years, but there will be so much to be seen which will be fascinating.